Well, it's that time of year again, and that is to do the best of list for 2016. I had been thinking about doing a worst of 2016, but I really don't care. I don't want to put too much effort in talking about it, and most of you would probably already know the books that have been disappointing. I had a rant about the book that really disappointed me the most for 2016 recently, and if you want to know what type of books have disappointed me, it is pretty much the overhyped books that I thought sounded interesting and thought I'd give them a go, but I just don't want to talk about them. And while they're fun to watch, I really don't care enough to put together another video. But I do want to talk about the best of 2016, and I tried to do a short list. I tried to narrow it down to 10, but I couldn't. I ended up with 15. And I normally do 15 books, but I normally break it into top fives of, say, non-fiction or fiction or translated fiction. But this year I couldn't really do that because I ended up with 6 non-fiction books and 8 books in translation. So it didn't quite work out the way I would normally do it. And I was tempted to do top 16 for 2016 because that would have allowed me to sneak in by Nightfall by Michael Cunningham, but I decided just to go with the 15, so honourable mention to Michael Cunningham for that book. At number 15, Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, because this is a book that is beautifully polished, so it's beautiful to read. But what really interested me in the book was the tiny nuggets of his ideas, and you can see the formation of existentialism starting to come through, and that really fascinated me. This is a book more about nihilism, but I was really interested in seeing some of those key ideas that Sartre has started to form in this book, and that's why I had to include it in the list. At number 14, Missing Person by Patrick Modiano, and this is a French novel as well, and I haven't seen many people talk about him on BookTube, which is disappointing because he writes some great books, and I did a review of this recently, and I have currently finished my second Modiano book already, and it has similar themes. It talks about identity and memory, and while it was a great book as well, Missing Person really stuck there because it was my first, and it's the one that really got me into this author. And I'll definitely be reading a lot more of his novels. I think he is a brilliant writer. My only concern is they do seem to share similar themes, and while the plot is different, I think that might get old quick, so I might have to space them out. At number 13 is the first non-fiction book for the list, and that is Existentialism and Excess. And this is the life and times of Jean-Paul Sartre by Greg Cox. And this is a really interesting biography. It's a fairly recent one, just talking about Sartre and his life. And I found that really fascinating. I love learning about these people, and I love understanding novelists, and I need to read more biographies because I get so much out of them, and I really need to focus on learning about these people that I am inspired by. And Sartre is one of those people that makes me feel dumb, and I love reading his books because they inspire me to push myself, and he's a very intelligent man with some ideas that I don't always agree with, but he has a way of arguing his points, and I really am impressed by his intellect. At number 12, no list is complete without some Russian literature, and this is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And I have been neglecting to mention translators, but they are going to be linked in the description below if you're interested in knowing what translations I would recommend. But just for time's sake, I have just been trying to push forward and get through this list as quick as possible because I don't want the video to be too long. But getting back to Brothers Karamazov, this is a really interesting exploration into family, into religion, into politics and society, and Fyodor Dostoevsky has always been an author that I'm impressed with because he explores so much, and I always get so much out of him. And while it's not Crime and Punishment, and that will remain probably my favourite of his, it's still a wonderful book and well worth reading. At number 11, another huge brick of a book, and this is Underworld by Don DeLillo. And while the first part of the book was a struggle to get through, it featured a lot of baseball, and you really have to push past that. It was worth it in the end. I think this is a masterpiece in postmodernism and a real interesting exploration into America and the Cold War, and I think that's something really worth exploring. And I have done a review of this book, so I won't talk too much about it, and I will try to remember to link all my video reviews down below. At number 10 we have Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak, and this is another novel that I think I got so much out of, and I think there's something well worth exploring with the life of the Soviet era. And while this is not as well written as The Brothers Karamazov, and I think it's more simplified and easier to read, I think there's something about this book that really resonated with me, and I think it might have been because I read the Zhivago affair right after, which explores the history of the book and how it was used as propaganda in the Soviet era by the CIA, and how Boris Pasternak was awarded the Nobel Prize, but he was forced to reject it by the government. And there's so much about this book that I think the history of the book, as well as the plot and the story of the book, all work together just to make this a great experience for me. And I recommend reading the Zhivago affair after reading Dr. Zhivago, because you get a sense of you get the story, and then you get the history behind the story, which I think really was a great combination. At number 9 is a book I read, I think was the first book I read in 2016, and that's Emile in Winter by Herbert Benjili. And this is another French novel, and I see a common theme of French literature coming through this year, but that might have been because of existentialism and philosophy. But getting back to Emile in Winter, this is a very short novel that really packs a huge punch, and something I would recommend reading if you're interested in war literature in particular, because this is the story of these Germans hunting for Jews, and it gets so cold that they come together in this building and share a meal. But it's so much more, and I don't really want to give away too much of the plot because it's something worth experiencing, and I have done a review, so you can watch that and learn a little bit more about the book. At number 8, I'm going to skip because I want to talk about number 7 before I talk about number 8. So at number 7, I have Second Hand Time by Svetlana Alexievich, and this is a book about the oral history of the collapse of the Soviet era. Svetlana Alexievich is this brilliant journalist, and I've read 2 books of hers this year. One was The Voices of Chernobyl, just talking about personal accounts of people's experience with these Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, but this is personal accounts of the collapsing Soviet era and post-Soviet life, and she goes around and interviews people, and I found that really fascinating, and I really liked hearing about the different points of view and the different feelings towards the collapse of the Soviet era. And this is collected at number 8. This is The Invention of Russia by Arkady Ostrowski, and he is talking about the collapsing Soviet era and post-Soviet Russia, and this is a non-fiction book about that. It starts off with perestroika and the way Gorbachev tried to reform the Soviet era, tried to root out all the corruption, and how perestroika led to the decline and the eventual collapse of the Soviet era. And then we talk about life after Soviet era, so Boris Yeltsin and eventually Vladimir Putin. So it explores a lot, and I wanted to pick this after reading Second Hand Time because I wanted to know more about perestroika, and I wanted to know more about life after the Soviet era. And I found this fascinating. It explored a lot about the media and the politics and the rising capitalism and crime and the Russian mob. So there's a lot there to explore, and it was well worth reading and a brilliant introduction to the topic, and I really recommend it for that. So getting back on track, we'll go to number 6, and this is Wild Swans by Zhong Chang, and this is the story of her life, her mother's life, and her grandmother's life in China. So we explore, starting with the grandmother's life, with the end of an era, the foot binding, the warlords, the concubines and all that, and moving on to the rising communism and Chairman Mao, and just the big changes that happened in such a short period of time within China. And we talk about the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, and so many things. And I was fascinated by this book. I love communist history. I love talking about the Soviet era. So I was really interested to explore similar topics from China and getting a real sense of what was happening in that era and the way people embraced communism and the differences between Soviet communism and Chinese communism or Maoism. So we're getting down to the top 5 books of 2016. At number 5, we have The Nobel Investigation by Kamel Daoud, and this is a rebuttal to The Stranger by Albert Camus, and talking about how in The Stranger Marcel kills an Arab and the Arab's never given a name. And this is told from the perspective of the Arab's brother and the effects of what has happened, and the effects not only on him and his family but on all of the country. And I really like this book because it does that. It's a counter argument, talking about philosophy a lot this year because it has been an interest of mine, and moving forward in 2017 I'll be reading a lot more philosophy. But I think philosophy is trying to argue a point, and The Stranger does a great job of arguing this point of absurdism, and the Marcel investigation does a brilliant job of counter-arguing it and showing a different side of it. And I have done a review on this as well, which I'm very proud of, so definitely check that one out. And number 4 is Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov, and Nabokov is a beautiful, stunning writer. He has elegant prose, and there's something just wonderful about reading his writing. And this starts off as a poem, and you can see Nabokov showing off that he can write poetry as well as beautiful novels. And this is a really interesting novel to explore because it talks about literary criticism a lot. And the more I read about Vladimir Nabokov, the more I want to read his books and reread his books, and I need to read some more biographies. I need to read his memoir, Speak Memory, because there's something about him that I'm fascinated by. At number 3, this is technically a reread, but I couldn't leave it off the list. This is Ex Libris by Anne Vanderman, and what I love about Anne Vanderman is she is this intelligent, witty writer, and she inspires me. I want to write like her, and I picked up this book because I wanted to reread the essays she had on her reading life, and I wanted to explore her writing again to try and inspire me to try and learn from her writing. And the second time around, it was still as brilliant and still a wonderful book that inspires me to become a better essay writer. And at number 2, the book that started my interest in philosophy and existentialism, and I've been exploring a lot since that, is At the Existentialist Cafe. And this is basically the history of existentialism, talking about existentialism, talking about the people involved. It's part biography, part history of the philosophy, and I really love this book. I think I got a lot out of it, and it really pushed me to explore philosophy a lot more. And this is a book that I am probably going to reread next year because there's so much in there, and I'm keen to get back to the book again just to see if I could pick up some more information and to see how the book compares now that I've begun my exploration into existentialism and philosophy. And that leads me to the best book of 2016 for me, and that was Submission by Michelle Houellebecq. And this is the one book that I started reading. I had to cancel any plans. I just wanted to stay home and finish the book, and I was obsessed with this book. This is a novel about a Muslim party coming to power in France, and it explores the complexities of the Muslim culture in a Western society, and it's not Islamic phobic, it's more just exploring different angles and different sides about Islam in Western society and how people react to it and how people don't understand and how people continue to associate terrorism to the Islamic faith. And there's so much going on, and I think it's a brilliant book and I highly recommend it. I have a review on this as well, and I will link it, even though I have since learned that I was pronouncing Michelle Houellebecq's name incorrectly, and that's kind of disappointment. And one of my biggest problems with reading a lot of books in translation is a lot of times I have been pronouncing names wrong, and I really hate that about videos because I have to learn how to pronounce a name. But there you have it. There's the 15 books that have shaped my 2016, and they're the 15 books that have impressed me. You can see a fair few non-fiction, a lot on Russia, a lot on philosophy, and then been the two main interests of mine, obviously for 2016 and probably going into 2017. So if you want to find me elsewhere, all my links to social media are in the description below, and as always, thank you for watching.